A black Louisiana family is outraged after their father was denied a burial plot because of the fact that they were black. So now this is Madison and Shayla Simeon, and they were at Oakland Spring Cemetery in Louisiana in order to get a plot for their father, who had recently passed away. So now the woman at the cemetery told them that due to contractual issues, they were not able to sell them a plot. Those contractual issues being, of course, that it is a whites-only cemetery. Yes. Let me give you the quote. Quote, "Unfortunately, I'm unable to sell you a plot. This graveyard is not for people of color. It is a white human being cemetery only." Oh, okay, so all of you who think that racism is over, not necessarily, especially if you go back in the South, because again, these words should not be uttered in 2021, and yet they are. It is absolutely unbelievable. Now, according to the Semians, the woman at the cemetery had a contract in her hands which read the right of burial of the remains of white human beings. She had this paperwork, Shayla said, in her hand that she said that was drawn up about 70 plus years ago. If we really wanted to have him buried there, we would have to get board approval because he was a colored man. And so this was back in the 1950s, and it still existed. That's insane. You have a cemetery that is literally whites only in this century. In this century. I live in Portland. It's not just the South. True. No, so I'm wrong. Like, racism does absolutely exist everywhere in this country. It is an unfortunate fact that we see it in a lot of different places. Even in the North, I live in Michigan. There's of course racists here. I've met some of them before, so I understand. But to see that it's still institutionalized in this country in certain places is insane. Absolutely insane. Dig them up to prove that they're all white. All right, so now turns out that the Oakland Spring Cemetery Board is aware of the incident now, and they are very, very sorry about this. In fact, Craig Vizina said, quote, "I'm still very ashamed of what happened. Who wouldn't be?" Well, yeah, I mean, everybody should be ashamed. The entire state of Louisiana should be ashamed. Stuff like this still apparently happens. Vizina says the contract was written in the 1950s when the cemetery was first opened, and that changes will be made. I promise you, it will be fixed. So now, I hope so. I'm glad that they took corrective action, but the question is it really enough? I mean, on the one hand, you could say, well, they did what they corrected the action, so they did all that they could really do. But why didn't they just say, well, screw this contract. I don't really care. It doesn't apply. We shouldn't have to go through the board for this. This is a literal no-brainer situation here. Of course you can bury your dad here. As long as you got the money, you can bury your dad. And of course that goes to another question of like, why do we have to, pay money to bury people? But that's an entirely different thing. That said, the Siemens think, no, the damage is done. We don't actually want to bury our dad here. He deserved better. In fact, quote, Shayla said, "My dad wasn't any man. He was a phenomenal man. He was a police officer in the same community for 15 years. He was denied a place to lay because of the color of his skin." And that is a pretty devastating point. Even somebody who's in the system, police officer, a black police officer, can still be discriminated against in this country. And that's, again, anybody who says that racism is over in this country, no, the legacy still exists. Yes, the Klan might not be, well, okay, I take that back. Charlottesville is a good example of the Klan being out and open, and people, of course, being against the entire idea of Black Lives Matter. And so this isn't a surprise to see that this continues to happen all around this country. And so they were, by the way, offered a family plot. They declined, and then the employee has been denied, or the employee who had denied them a burial has been fired as a result of this. So I don't know. It's up to you to kind of figure out whether or not you think that this was enough restitution. But it should point to a broader conversation on trying to dismantle the institutions, the implements of Jim Crow, and even further back, slavery. Because even though there's been quite a large passage of time between now and the end of slavery, and not so much time between now and the end of Jim Crow, there are still these, and people think that it's a long time, but these institutions still exist. These things still exist. These laws are still codified, and we need to do something about it to really untangle that disgusting, disastrous legacy of racism in this country. If you enjoyed this video, please give us a like and share with your friends. You can subscribe and help out the channel by becoming a patron. It's patreon.com/Jeff Waldorf, or you can become a channel member as well by hitting the join button below.